So, dear colleagues, dear friends, I welcome back for those of you who have attended yesterday already, and a warm welcome also to those who could just make it for today around the world. We are happy to have you here. Today, we not only deal with the welfare system and the challenges we have in a broad sense, we be more concrete. We look at the social assistance systems in key countries. And since our two keynote speakers are from the United States, we thought it would be good to have two experts from Asia and two from Europe to compensate the knowledge. And I'm very, very happy to welcome four top scientists, economists working on social assistance issues in various countries. We will go one to one by them, but I list them just in the sequence how they will speak to us. There is Professor Hayashi from the University of Tokyo. We have Professor Ku from Seoul National University, Professor Sperman from University of Freiburg, and Professor Gustafsson from University of Gothenburg. So we have Japan, South Korea, Germany, and Sweden here, and I'm very happy to have this round. We know that the world faces a larger number of challenges, not only currently and repeatedly, like the financial market crisis, like the pandemic, but also we see coming, already going on, huge demographic imbalances in many countries. We have other challenges like global warming, wars, and so on. So it's very important for many countries to reconsider their welfare systems, how this can be made fit and flexible for these challenges. And the purpose is to learn from other countries with large experiences and different kinds of challenges. So I'm very happy now to let us first start with Professor Hayashi, who will talk about public assistance in Japan, current state and challenges. So please.
Okay, thank you very much for introducing. Let's just share the slideshow here. Okay. Thank you very much. Can you listen? Okay, yeah. Is that all right? All right, okay. Perfect. Thank you very much, Professor Fan and Professor Zimmerman. And thank you very much for inviting me to this interesting conference. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I feel honored to be a part of this session. But frankly, it is somewhat daunting to be a starter here, but let me start my talk anyway. Here we go. So in my talk, I will describe the current state of public assistance, just abbreviated as PA, which is the last safety net in Japan. And I will also summarize the reforms in the PA system in the 2010s. And lastly, I will list the issues we face. The largest challenge would come from the aging of Japanese society and the failure of our public pension system. Oops, is it working? All right. So since the PA is the last safety net in your country, it may be advisable to have some glimpse of the upper layer of social safety net in Japan. As always, we have public unemployment insurance, and of course we have public pension, and we have public health insurance, and of course multiple kinds of targeted transfers, for example, single mothers and handicapped and disabled. And we have public assistance, sorry. And public assistance is the last safety net, as I said, and we call it in Japanese, seikatsu hogo, which literally means the protection of daily life. And the program is, of course, tax financed, and it aims to guarantee the basic cost of living. So since this is the last safety net, the PA is residual. And the system is supposed to help anyone that is excluded from the other types or upper layers of social safety net. And as such, it covers more people to the extent that the other types of social safety net fails to function. And secondly, PA is comprehensive. It covers any types of household. The old-aged, single mothers, handicapped, injured and sick, and the other types. And the benefit also cover any types of household expenses, including daily consumption, housing, education, medical care, long-term care, and others. In particular, the recipient can receive medical services, which are free access in Japan, without paying any copayment. And there are some basics on the PA system. Of course, central government, since my country is a unitary country, the central government sets the regulations and the rules for the system, which is uniform across the country. And local government then implement the PA program following the rules set by the center. And the center matches 75% of the PA benefits and the cost for the what we call independent support programs through categorical transfers. And the remaining part of the cost is borne by local government. But for those localities with little fiscal capacity, the center guarantees the funds for the local burden through another system of central grant. And the benefit provision is means tested, of course, and the benefit formula is gap filling. So the recipients are assessed by local welfare offices to see if they're eligible. And the assessment itself is based on the recipient inability to earn sufficient income. Then once admitted to the PA system, the recipient receives benefits that are equal to the basic cost of living in excess of their approved revenues. And the BCL, basic cost of living, are set uniformly by the central government and calculated on the household basis and based on a formula that reflects household needs and regional prices. And the other part, approved revenues include labor earnings as well as non-labor earnings. Earnings is omitted here. The typical non-labor earnings include typical included revenues of pension benefits and other monetary benefits provided by the public sector. Sorry, there's some mistakes in here. But they exclude or deduct some proportion of labor earnings through what we call basic deduction. And the basic deduction schedule looks like this. And those are the two schedules before and after reform in 2013. However, I will first examine some statistics on PA recipient, and then I will come back to this topic later. So current state, we see some statistics on public assistance system. And this is the size and the population share of recipient individuals. And of course, those changes reflect both transitory and structural factors. And recent transitory factors include the world financial crisis in 2008, which caused a large surge in caseload since 2009, around here. And then we have economic recovery, which gradually reduced the caseload up to now. And while not shown in the figure, there is, of course, an immediate concern about the effect of the current pandemic. And also the structural factors include the aging of Japanese society, which I will discuss later in detail. So this is a quite change, isn't it? I mean, in 20 years, the caseload is almost doubled. And this is the size of recipient household by type. And we have 5 household types defined in the lexicographic order for PA statistics. And first is old age, single mother, handicapped, injured and sick, and the others. And this graph shows that the only old age household and handicapped household here are increasing. And most striking is the increases in old age household. And the continual increase in old age household constitute a very serious structural factor. And then this is the spending on public assistance. And in terms of money spent, the size is doubled from 2 trillion around here to 4 trillion in 20 years. Actually, exactly 18 years because we have 2018 here. So, and note please that we don't have almost no inflation during this period. So these changes are real. These changes are real. And obviously these changes reflect the caseload changes we have seen before, like here. Okay, but if you measure the expense in terms of GDP share, the rate is still under 1%. So red line is the GDP share of PA expense. So I think in comparison with the other countries, this share is rather low. And this is the category share of PA expense. The most striking part is that the PA covers the cost for medical care, which occupies almost half of the expense. And so if this part is taken care of by other systems than PA, our expenses will be halved. And this is the labor participation by cohort. Labor participation has been increasing, like here. So this is the average for those aged 20 or older. And then those are the cohort-wise labor participation rate. And of course, the participation rate decreases by age. And we have a dip after 2008, which is the world financial crisis. And the dip is more salient for younger cohort. But if you look at those aged between 16 and 69, their labor participation rate is still increasing. And also even for aged 70 or older, we still have a slight steady increases in labor participation rate. So overall, you know, the average labor participation rate is increasing. And I think if you compare the starting point, the increase rate is just like 50%, which is quite huge, I guess. And this is the distribution of monthly labor earnings. And then if you look at this, the shape is somewhat strange. There's a plateau shaped part between, like this part is like 450 US dollar equivalent to 900 US equivalent. This is monthly earnings. So I'm not quite sure why this shape happens. I mean, I have checked institutional mechanism that doesn't have any hint that suggests this shape of labor earnings. But anyway, this is it. So the key point is that the half point of recipients are old aged and whose number is increasing. And half of the benefit is spent for medical care. And on average, labor market participation has increased 50% in the last decade, and the PA expense has been doubled over the last 20 years. So this is a summary of the statistics. So the recent reforms. We have three types of recent reforms. And the first one is reform in the basic deduction schedule. And the central government changed the deduction schedule starting August 2013. The reform affected, of course, the PA benefit and therefore recipient consumption. And PA benefit is given like this. The benefit is equal to basic cost of living minus approved revenues, and which consist of labor earnings minus basic deduction and plus other revenues. So the recipient consumption is given as a labor earnings because the recipient are not allowed to save money. So the recipient consumption is equal to labor earnings plus other revenues and plus benefit. Then if you plug those in, you come up with the recipient consumption equals to basic cost of living plus basic deduction. And the basic deduction, the amount of the basic deduction increases in labor earnings. And as such, recipient consumption also increases in labor earnings, although with a high marginal tax rate. And this is the chart. And vertically, we measure consumption, and horizontally, we measure earnings. And since the consumption is the basic cost of living plus deduction, so this is it. This is the intercept as the BCL, and we have the deduction schedule. And the gray line shows the reform, gray line shows the schedule before the reform, and the red line shows the schedule after the reform. And the key point is here, the kink point here. This point is the earning level threshold. Beyond that, before that, below that, they have 100% deduction. So that the slope here is just a 45-degree line. The reform extended the threshold. It's almost double the threshold up to here. So the 45-degree line extend from here to there. And then they apply the uniform deduction rate, which gives you 90% of marginal tax rate, which seems quite high. But before that, around here, they faced 93% of marginal tax rate. And since we had the ceiling on the deduction, they faced 100% marginal tax rate in here. So around here, the change is from 80% marginal tax rate to 0 marginal tax rate. So only this part faced an increase in marginal tax rate. Then, so what happens to the income distribution after this reform? And this is it. And I estimated the Kerner distribution using natural log of earnings so that we can see the details of the lower part of the distribution. And this line corresponds to the income level here. And this income level, earnings level, corresponds to this line. So we see two distinct bunching here. And before the reform, we observed the bunching here. After the reform, we observed the bunching relocated to this upper point. So this figure suggests that the change in the deduction schedule relocated the bunching with an increase in labor earnings. So that's reform number 1. And the reform number 2 is reductions in the BCL. Before this century, in the previous century, they continually increased the BCL. But after this century began, the central government started to reduce the PCL in several occasions. We had 3 occasions where they reduced the PCL. The first is 2004 and 2006, and the second is 2013 to 2015. The third is the most recent reduction is from 2018 to until the last year, actually. Okay, not every types of recipient face reductions, but on average, they face reductions. Like in the most recent reform, single mothers and old-aged couples didn't face the reduction. But overall, we faced a series of reductions in the basic cost of living, which means that, of course, reduction in the PA benefit. The third is the introduction of what we call independence support programs. This is quite recent. They introduced this program in 2013. For this program, the national government provides a framework and they fund for the programs, and those programs are implemented by the local government as always. And for the first few years, the central government provided full subsidy with 100% subsidy rate. And then after 2016, they reduced the funding with partial subsidy of 75%. And typical local program include the placement of support staff at local welfare offices for counseling and advising for finding jobs. And the provision of services and instructions by the support staff for discipline, what we call disciplined lifestyle of PA recipient. And the last is the provision of employment support and the coordination with public employment offices for finding employment. And however, the intensity of the programs varies among local governments because there are no strict rules to dictate the local government. And plausibly among caseworkers and support staff members, of course. And the effect of the programs are yet to be investigated. There are some preliminary studies, and that study shows although the coefficient indicates the increase of the employment, but the coefficient isn't statistically significant enough. So we don't have any sufficient evidence to see the effect of this introduction of the program. So those are the 3 main reforms we conducted during last 2 decades. So now we come to the issues and prospect. I summarized issues 3. Of course, they are not exclusive, but the major issues are the following. The first one is low take-up rate. The point is the PA provision requires the application by potential recipient. So unless you don't apply, you don't get it. And there are several estimates for the take-up rate, and those are the most recent one provided by the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. And these estimates suggest that the take-up is low, and which may be due to stigma that is typical in Japanese society. Number 2, bureaucratic disentitlement. This is something we call in Japanese frontline operation by local government. This is exactly the exclusion of the qualified. And anecdotal evidence suggests that the B would be the factor. although we don't have any strong statistical evidence for that, but no, anecdotal stories says that way. And the issue two, this is quite important, reductions in old age pension benefit. And we do expect more people will be excluded from the public pension system. And the most worrying are those who are supposed to be enrolled in the national pension plan. The national pension is designed for non-regular workers, the self-employed, and the unemployed. So that is, it covers those who are excluded from the mainstream types of public pension. And the crucial point is this, national pension benefits are smaller than the basic cost of living. And this year, the maximum amount is equivalent to $600 per month, which is for those who have been enrolled in the plan for the full subscription period, which is 40 years. So an old couple, so they have $1,200 per month, could obtain this pension benefit more than their BCL if they own their own house. But if one of them passes away, the survivor needs to depend on PA if she or he has no savings. And again, the aging of Japanese society will further reduce the national pension benefit level. You see those pyramids. The pyramids change us like that. This is from 1965 to 2065. And the central government has set the rule that the pension benefit be adjusted to balance the budget, the public pension account, budget in the public pension account. Thus, aging will reduce national pension benefit level in the foreseeable future. As such, PA will cover the part of the PNP benefit falls short of the BCL. So that's another structural part that the PA system facing. And there are further additional factors to reduce the PN benefit level, PNP benefit level, national pension benefit level. This is the share of months in which subscribers pay their contributions. So not all subscribers in national pension plan pay their premiums, right? And recently, so the more the share is, it's better, the better. Recently, it is increasing due to the recovery of the economy, but it's still low compared to the shares in the 70s, which is not listed in here. In the 70s, the share was like more than 90%. It's way lower right now. The share is way lower right now. And another graph I show here is the share of subscribers with full premium waiver. And those with lower income can ask exemption to waive the premium. And the share of those granted full premium waiver is increasing, like shows with blue line. And the problem is those granted such waivers will receive only a half of the full benefit. So right now, the full benefit is like $600 per month. And in the foreseeable future, the government reduce that level. And in addition, those people will receive less than that. So the public assistance necessarily will cover those people. So PA is soon to cover those people after their retirement. So this is quite structural problem we are facing. And third issue, fiscal pressures on local government. With old age recipient increasing, local government will face more fiscal pressures. Please remember that 25% of peer benefit and all costs of the welfare offices must be financed through local revenues. So this is like local government cover the deficiency of the safety net designed by the central government. And the effective implementation of independent support program will depend on the discretion and the resources of local government. So we may then expect large regional disparities in the services that the local welfare offices could provide. And furthermore, local fiscal pressures might easily result in more cases of bureaucratic disentitlement and reducing the take-up rates. Okay, I think this is it. And to sum up, due to the aging of Japanese society, old age recipients are increasing and will increase more, and that put fiscal and administrative pressures on local government with varying degrees. So that affects the actual implementation of the public assistance in the foreseeable future. And the previous reform in public pension did not help. It will even give an adverse effect on public assistance. That is an increase of old age PA recipients. And since PA, public assistance, is the last safety net, only reforming PA would not work well. Reforms in the upper layer of social safety net are also necessary, but it's very difficult, as I said. Well, some example would be this. Introducing an equivalent of the EITC may help. Japan has not introduced it yet. So although the impact are limited to those who can work. So the choices are very limited. So thank you for listening. This is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hayashi. So now the invitation is to everybody, not only on the panel, but from all the participants, where we have many, as I see, to ask questions. So one possibility is, please write into the chat. Yes, there's a chat below. Write down your question. One possibility, and but you also could raise your hands or intervene at some stage. Now, the first person who has asked a question and may want to also express it is Professor Robert Moffat. Welcome, Robert, again. Should I read it, or do you want to say to speak on it?
I think it's a pretty simple question. So, Professor, maybe Masuyoshi can just answer that. Read it.
I can read it for everybody. How does the PA program handle support from children for the aged population? Either co-residents.
Sorry, I couldn't get the chat windows here. So
you have to click at the chat down. And if you go down in the lower line, there is
they
something.
have to be a chat, but
if you click, yes, but if you put your cursor on it, it has nothing to do with closing anything. You just put your cursor on the chat below.
I don't get it. Oh, here's it. Okay, thank you. I can get it right now. Chat. All right. How does the PA program? Okay, I see. So this is a question from Professor Moffat.
Yes.
How does the PA program handle support from the children for the aged population? Yes, if they receive support from the children, that support is included in the approved revenues. So that's gonna be the direct subtraction from the benefit. Am I answering your questions?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the second question then is, does this program discourage children from, supporting their parents? Because if they do provide support to their parents, then the government will reduce the payment, right, to the parents.
Well, I think you're right. This program is incentivize the children not to support their parents, right? But there was a criticism before. I mean, the caseworker has to call all the family members if they can support their parents. And then usually they don't have the legal right to ask them to support them. So usually those works, which takes a lot of time, end up with nothing. So they try to change the policy not to get deeper into asking if they can support or not.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So I can probably share a little bit on what China has been doing, at least from the villages we visited. Actually, if you have grown-up children, even you don't receive support from them, the government, the bureau will still consider that you have a source of support and make deductions. Yeah. So I have another question for Professor Hayashi. So people has been talking about increasing the retirement age in Japan, like for example to 70. I don't know how is it coming soon, or how does that affect the issues that you have discussed? Will that be enough to solve the problems?
Well, yes or no. Basically, even those who are not in the PA program, the aged people are really working, and the labor participation rate in Japan is quite high. So I think it won't solve, basically. But in terms of pension premiums, as long as you're employed and the legal retirement age is like 70, then there is a 5-year extension. So during that period, you're supposed to pay the premium. So in terms of revenues, yeah, it helps. But I'm not quite sure the well-being of the old aged persons.
I see. Thank you.
I hope the retirement age will be 70 though.
For professors.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Robert, you wanted to ask another question? No, not. I was thinking you were intervening.
No.
No, not yet. Okay, fine. No. So are there other issues around? I mean, of course, getting more people to work is one solution. I mean, also Germany debates, we will hear about that, about the retirement age, but it's politically very, very controversial. Now, so my vague memory on Japanese working statistics is that females are not so much working in the second part of the work life. Is this still true? Or could you mobilize more females staying into the work area?
It is changing. It is changing. We use MCOP. If you measure the age of female horizontally and the labor participation rate is vertically, and if you plot that, the shape is like M, but it's getting a plateau. So it is changing. One of the reasons is the average income of Japanese is decreasing. So unless you're supposed to work, you can support your family. That's one of the reasons.
Okay, then I see another hand by Alexander Sperman. Alexander, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that very interesting talk with all the institutional details. So having a look on your earnings consumption diagram, it looks like a little bit like an earned income tax credit, doesn't it? So I would be interested with respect to effects on participation, so extensive margin and intensive margin, so the effect on hours worked. So as I got your earnings distribution in logs correctly, there is a bunching effect, right? So you have just shifted the king to the right. That could be interpreted as a kind of positive employment effect. And why don't you continue with that?
Well, actually I am. And then basically I do have a micro data for that. And then I'm just struggling the effect of those, schedule changes. Yeah, and then is that your question or?
Did you find a positive hours effect, intensive margin, and positive participation effects, extensive margin of this reform?
Intensive margin, it's the result is a little weird. If you look at the bunching, it seems like we have the positive intensive margins effect. But in terms of extensive margin, it's quite difficult. Data is very, contaminated. And then we haven't tried the effect of intensive margin, extensive margin case. So we're still working on it. But my guess is there'll be little effect on extensive margin.
Okay. But you don't proceed with respect to more earned income tax credit ideas in your system? Oh,
that part. Well, our government is very reluctant to introduce because EITC kind of thing is in the hands of Minister of Finance, right? They all have to do with the tax system. And this system is managed by the Ministry of Labor, Health and Welfare. So it's quite difficult to introduce subsidy part. The maximum they can do is just get 100% deduction.
Okay.
Yeah, so
thanks a lot.
EITC type of, I think that is very necessary for us to introduce, but they don't like the increases in workload in tax offices.
Okay.
So all the those bureaucratic things hinders the introduction.
Yeah. Okay.
To that.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much. I do not see any further questions at the moment, and since this is the case, I would say we also are out of time from the first session. We can just thank Professor Hayashi for these important insights. I mean, good luck for Japan. I mean, the aging issue was well aware anyway, and all the best.
It's quite daunting, isn't it?
Yes, but you're not alone. I mean, this doesn't help so much, but you're not alone. And I belong to a country which has also big challenges, as we will see. So we move a little bit further around the globe, move to South Korea, to Seoul, and to Professor Koo, who will introduce us to the social assistance in South Korea. And he talks about policy developments, impacts, and implications for future reform. So Professor Koo, maybe you take over. I still see Professor Hayashi here. Yes, perfect.
Can you see the screen?
Yes.
The slides? Okay.
Very good.
Okay. It is a great pleasure to be here in this conference. And my name is In-Hae Koo from Seoul National University. Just a minute. Okay. I'm going to talk about 3 largest social assistance programs in South Korea today. The first one is National Basic Livelihood Security Program. It's something like livelihood protection program in Japan. And that program provides a livelihood cash benefit and medical benefit and housing benefit. I'm going to talk about also on the income tax credit, which was introduced in 2008, and child tax credit. I will talk about the basic pension program for the elderly. Since 2000s, the National Basic Livelihood Security Program has been the largest social assistance program in South Korea, and spending very slowly growing over the last 2 decades. And nowadays, the government spends about 0.8% of GDP on this program. And we have also EITC program, but it was a very small program until recently. But the government expanded its coverage and spending in 2019. We have a basic pension program for the elderly, and the program has been a fast-growing program. And in 2020, it became the largest social assistance program in Korea. The National Basic Livelihood Security Program, main motivation of the program is to extend the eligibility to those who can work. And until 2015, the MBLS was a kind of a unified benefit system, which provided all the benefits together for those who had income below minimum cost of living. After the 2015 reform, the MBLS changed the income standard to a relative measure based on the median income and introduced a customized benefit system which differentiate the eligibility standard for different benefits. So currently, 30% of median income is applied to the livelihood benefit, and 40% to medical benefit, and 45% to housing benefit. Recently, the government has been gradually removing family support obligation rule, which denies eligibility to the poor having family members who can financially support them. In the MBLS, if income of applicants is below a specified percent of median income, they become eligible. When applicants' income is counted, you can see the asset is converted to income and then added to other assessed income. The livelihood benefit provides the difference between the income standard and applicants' income. Since 2020, 30% on the income is disregarded. Other benefits has been providing in-kind benefits. There are 3 major issues around the MBLS program. The first one is low take-up rate because of very complicated and very strict eligibility rules, including family support obligation and conversion of asset into income. In addition, there is a very large coverage gap because the low income standard excludes most of the working poor population. And the evaluation of the 2015 reform, the evaluation may be debatable. The system has not been successful in raising eligibility and benefit standard for livelihood benefit, which was one motivation to change the income standard to a relative measure based on the median income, but it didn't work so far. But on the other hand, you can see it has been very successful in expanding in-kind benefit, such as housing benefit. The table presents recipients' rate of MBRS in the joint distribution of income and asset. It shows that low income and low asset families are more likely to receive the MBRS benefit. For example, the lowest income and lowest asset families is among them 41% of the people are getting the MBRS benefit. Yet you can see that even the lowest income asset families shows relatively low take-up rates because of the complicated rule. This graph shows for one-person household, the eligibility income standard has not been declining in terms of nominal or real value. But if you see the income threshold relative to median income, it has been declining over the period. Although right after the 2015 reform, it increased temporarily the benefit standard, but the trend has not been changing. The same story applies to three-person household too. As a result, you can see the number of recipients for the livelihood benefit shown in the red line substantially declined, especially since 2009 until recently. On the other hand, the number of recipients for housing benefit shown in the green line increased, especially after the elimination of the family support obligation rule in 2018. This graph shows that the share of economically inactive population among the MBRS recipients, it was high, about 70% at the start of MBRS in 2001, and the share rose to 93% in 2015. It may be due to low and declining income standard relative to median income. Next, let's move on to the income tax credit. EITC was introduced in 2008 for helping low-income families work more and earn more income. And 2014, the design of EITC was changed from one providing large benefit for families with more children to one providing large benefit for families with more earners. Also, child tax credit separated from EITC. In 2019, it expanded its coverage and it raised its benefit. So you can see the design of EITC here is similar to the US type on the income tax credit, except for one thing. That one thing to be noted is that payment increases according to the number of honors, single honor and dual honor, rather than the number of children. I skipped this one, child tax credit. So EITC was a small program until recently, but it became a large program in terms of the number of recipients and in terms of the size of total expenditure since 2019. Although EITC has been greatly expanded recently, it may not efficiently help low-income working families because the coverage has expanded mainly for single, young adult, and childless families, and more support is given to dual honor families, and limited assistance has been provided for low-income families with more children. In this table, we are comparing the characteristics of EITC recipients in 2009 and after the reform in 2019. You can see the coverage expansion was concentrated on single and below 30 and childless adults. The table, in this table, you can see the income threshold of EITC for each category of people, and you can see also the median income of the category of the people. So you can see the income threshold as a percentage of median income was very low for large families with 3 members and 4 members, 3 members and 4 members. Then for the small families with 1 member or 2 members. So if you look at the recipients rates in the joint distribution of income and asset in 2019, you find that a substantial number of relatively high income individuals are receiving the benefit. I think the benefit is not well targeted to low income individuals. Let's move on to the basic pension. The basic pension is a tax-financed, non-contributory pension cash benefit program. It was introduced in 2008 because of rising concerns on the coverage gap and low benefit level of the contributory national pension program. And in 2014 and since 2018, the benefit level was significantly raised. The basic pension benefit is provided for all the people up to 70 percentile among all the people population. I mean 70 percentile of the income distribution. And the benefit is about 3.6 million Korea won per person. The basic pension benefit is rather broadly distributed in the income and asset distribution, especially in the asset distribution, because all the people usually have their housing asset and they are covered by the basic pension programs. But also you can see that low-income elderly people are more likely to receive benefit. Currently, the largest concern is on the extremely high poverty rate among the elderly. If you measure poverty based on the 50% of median income, almost 45% of elderly people are classified as poor in South Korea. And many people think it may be due to the low benefit level of the basic pension program. But however, if you raise the benefit of the BP, many people concerned it may cause a negative effect on the participation in the contributory national pension program, because it may be seen as an alternative to contributory pension program. The other concern is the rapidly rising and very large expenditure on the basic pension program. This table shows, you can see there are 5 million basic pension beneficiaries, and among them, 2 million people are receiving both basic pension and public pension benefits. It means that there are more than 4 million public pension beneficiaries nowadays. So more than half of the public pension beneficiaries are getting the basic pension benefit also as well. If you look at the level of public pension, the benefit level of public pension, you can see more than 60% of public pension beneficiaries are getting very low level of pension benefit, which is 0.4 million Korean won, less than 0.4 million Korean won, which is very close to the benefit level of basic pension. So many people may see a basic pension as an alternative to the national pension program. So it may work as a disincentive on the participation of the contributory pension program. Spending on the basic pension continued to grow from 12 trillion Korean won in 2018 to 29 trillion won in 2027. So it's almost tripled during the 10 years. Let's look at the evidence on impacts of current social assistance program. First, the table shows the impacts of a social assistance program on poverty in 2019. The poverty rate of market income was 16%, and all public transfer reduced poverty rate to 9%. Among public transfers, public pension significantly reduced the poverty rate by 2.8 percentage points, and for the elderly poverty rate by 10 percentage points. But social assistance programs has not been effective in reducing poverty. Only basic pension significantly reduced the elderly poverty rate by 8 percentage points, and EITC reduced child poverty by 1 percentage point. And the National Basic Livelihood Security Program does not have a meaningful effect on poverty here. Look at this graph for one-person household and three-person household. The horizontal axis in this graph shows market income, while the vertical axis shows disposable income, including social assistance benefits. This graph suggests that this one is MBRS livelihood benefits, and this graph suggests that this livelihood benefits may not be an attractive option for working age families, given that the benefit level is so low compared to the minimum wage. And for three-person household, livelihood benefits are more close to minimum wage. But if you consider the benefit from EITC and CTC, it's still very low. So it may not be an attractive option for working families. This graph shows the similar picture for old age families. I think for the elderly population, usually they have limited work ability. So the MBRS benefit level is still low, but it may be an option for them. But the increased basic pension program provides an easy alternative to the MBRS livelihood benefits. So that reduce any potential incentive effects of MBRS for older people. Regarding the National Basic Livelihood Security Program, their effects, if you look at the Korean literature, you can find that it is very hard to find firm evidence from the literature because there is no regional variation in the MBRS program parameters, and it is difficult to find exogenous variation in eligibility because the eligibility is mainly determined by income. Many studies assessed the effect of MBRS by comparing recipients and non-recipients. And recent studies used the propensity score matching to select more comparable non-recipients. But findings from those studies still may be biased due to the endogeneity problem of the benefit receipt. A few studies started to use exogenous variation in the eligibility, for example, education level, but still struggling to find any strong evidence of the effect because there is a very small variation captured by the exogenous variables such as education. And one recent study examined the common trend assumption for the treatment and control group and consider a very low take-up rate to produce wild estimates. And overall result shows that some studies find effects on income and work participation, but not many studies. The evaluation of on the income tax credit can be conducted more rigorously because there is there is a exogenous variation in the eligibility rule, such as the number of children and age. Also, there was some program changes in the benefit rules, so you can use that changes. And one recent study applied difference in difference method to use those exogenous variation. And including this study, many studies find positive effects on workers with low work ability. I mean the positive effects on the labor force participation, and they do not usually find any positive effects, and some find negative effects on the working hours. For the evaluation of the basic pension program, studies usually use DID, while some studies apply regression discontinuity design using age or income as a score variable. And the typical result across most studies, they usually fail to find any significant effects on income, consumption, poverty, work, or private transfer. It may be due to the low benefit level of the basic pension, or maybe due to inadequate research design to capture the small effect. But still, low study examines the effect on the participation in contributory pension programs. Let's move on to the reform proposals. There are a few competing proposals about the reform of social assistance program. Recently, a very radical reform proposal to replace existing welfare programs with a negative income tax program is gaining momentum. About the reform of MBRS reform, actually so far the most important reform agenda for MBRS has been to remove family support obligation rule, which has been eliminated and to be eliminated soon. So the next agenda is to raise income standard and remove the income conversion rule, the system converting asset into income. Those two rules are causing some low take-up rates and large coverage gap. There are three competing ideas about the reform of basic pension program. One is to introduce a more generous minimum income protection for the elderly by integrating the basic pension program and the National Basic Livelihood Security Program for the elderly population. The other one is to universalize the basic pension eligibility. So the basic pension provides benefits to all the elderly population. And another idea, which is an intermediate solution, is to reform the basic pension into a minimum pension program for low-income elderly people. The final reform proposal is a negative income tax proposal. the starting point of the proposal is provide an alternative to the universal basic income proposal, which has been gaining popularity during the COVID pandemic. And it emphasizes that NIT is more redistributive with less spending than the universal basic income proposal, and furthermore remove the government intrusion into citizens' lives, which pervades among the existing welfare programs. But it cannot avoid the well-known trilemma problem between guarantee tax rates and the budget required, like in other welfare programs. So let me conclude my presentation here. Korean welfare system, like systems in other East Asian countries, has been characterized as a productivist welfare regime. And people think the main feature of the productivist welfare regime is to consider the government consider social policy as a supplementary measure for economic growth. But nowadays, this kind of productivist system is challenged by the universal basic income idea, which one of a strong presidential hopeful in the ruling party has been advocating. And politicians in a major opposition party are suggesting negative income tax as a better alternative to the universal basic income. But still, we believe that we need a more balanced approach to reform existing welfare programs. We need a better functioning minimum income protection programs, and we need a more universalized social insurance system. We need to consider those two kinds of social assistance and social insurance programs in an integrated framework. That's my conclusion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Koo. It's the same policy as before. If you have a question, if you wish to contribute, please write into the chat or somehow raise your hands or make yourself visible. Is there any issue so far? I cannot see anybody. Let me see. Alexander, is this raising your hands or is this still from the previous round?
No, new contribution.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, Alexander, go ahead. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Well, I'm very interested to see how things are proceeding in South Korea. I had the honor to participate in that 2016 conference on UBI in Seoul. And obviously things are going on, and you have now a discussion between the UBI and the NIT. It would be interesting. So what are the main pros for NIT, and what are the main pros for UBI, and why are they seen as alternatives in the South Korean policy context?
It's hard to explain, but there was a big debate about the emergency support program during the COVID pandemic in South Korea. And there has been always a debate which one to choose between the universal income subsidy and selective income support. And government always considered at the first the selective approach, but many party and citizens demand more universal approach because there are some rules if you choose some threshold for supporting income. So there are a lot of debates and increasing interest in the universal approach. During the process, the most powerful presidential candidate in the ruling party has been advocating and experiment a small-scale universal basic income program for youth in their province. So it has been a fact, but still there are many people. It may not be feasible because of it demands a large expenditure. Also, it may be not fair because there are a lot of disadvantaged people, but you have to reduce the benefit for the disadvantaged people to provide the universal benefit for whole population. During the process, some conservative social policy experts has begun to advocate negative income tax proposal as an alternative, and also during the by-election of Seoul mayor in last year, the candidate from the opposing party campaigned that kind of negative income tax proposal during the campaign. So it's gaining momentum during the by-election process. So now it's competing. One candidate advocates UBI, the other one is advocates negative income tax proposal, and many social policy experts is still remain in the reform of the existing welfare programs.
Very interesting. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
May I?
Yeah.
May I? Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation. I have some questions, and then you mentioned the universal basic income and negative income tax. What are the differences between them? Is there any specific features original in those proposals?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, some of the advocates of universal basic income also favors negative income tax proposal because it's there are kind of similarity between the two proposals. Universal basic income proposals, the advocates want to distribute flat rate cash transfers to all the population first. After that, they think they can collect tax money by progressive tax system. And the advocates of the negative income tax proposal, they just don't need to provide all the flat rate benefit to all the population, because you can use the tax system, and if you provide a negative tax to the disadvantaged people, basically you can achieve similar purpose using relatively small expenditure. So basically, the Korean version of negative income tax proposal, they just want to guarantee the income of 50% of median income to all the population. And if they work, they earn more labor income and or business earnings, they just tax 50% of the earnings, so they can have 50% of their earnings they can keep the money, and then most people up to the 100% of minimum income may get some small amount of benefit from the negative tax income credit, but over the median income people, over the median income level, people don't get any subsidy from the negative income tax, but they should pay tax.
Great, thank you very much. So the difference is the way you transfer the money. Mm-hmm. So the UBI relies on the ex ante transfer.
Right.
The negative income tax relies on ex post transfer.
Right.
So which do you think, the better? First you distribute all of them, then tax later, or you adjust when they tax? So, which is better, do you think?
Yeah, it may be similar in principle, but it may be very different in practice, in reality, because you have to adjust all the tax system if you want to achieve the same purpose. So it may be very different in reality, and for the most part, people feels that NIT is more feasible option because it requires less tax money to start with.
Okay, thank you. The feasibility is important, right? Thank you.
Sorry, I have to unmute me. Yes, thank you very much for all your contributions so far. I don't see anybody in the chat. We have discussed things out, and also time is over, so to speak. So I would have a more conceptual question, but maybe we leave that issue, which is an issue for all presenters, more to the end. And since I see Alexander Sperman back, so also I think so some people may think we should have a break. We have no plan for a break, and so since we are tough people, I think should maybe just move ahead. Since I see Alexander Sperman fresh, and you all look good and strong. It has been very, very interesting, and we have to at the end maybe find out whether there is what are the major differences between Asia and Europe, to see whether there are some in the ideas how to handle things. But at the moment, we move to Germany, which is facing lots of issues and lots of debates over the years. And Alexander Sperman from the FOM University in Cologne, and at the same time professor at the University of Freiburg. He is our local expert. He speaks about basic income in Germany, 1991 to 2021, challenges after reunification, hard reforms, and the current reform debates. Oh, a long program, Alexander.
Okay. That's absolutely true. So, but I can also refer to the NIT and UBA debate just raised here in South Korea and Tokyo and Japan. And so let me first try to share my screen here with you. And that's how it looks like. And let me just try out the full screen. Yes. Okay. I I got it. Well, so this talk is about basic income in Germany, and I would like to give a longer perspective, so 30 years. So I have to be more superficial with respect to details because I want to cover a longer time period. I'll go through challenges after reunification, then come to the Hartz reforms and current reform debate. So as Klaus Zimmermann has also already mentioned, I'm professor at FOM Cologne and also at the University of Freiburg and research fellow at GLO. I'm really happy for your invitation, and I'm also very grateful to thank the host, the virtual host at Jinan University. Of course, all of us would have liked to see your gate of the campus and look at the main library here, but maybe next time. So thanks a lot for hosting the conference. Thanks a lot for the invitation. And just a couple of words with respect to FOM University. We have about 50,000 students in Germany in 35 study centers, also one study center in Vienna. So that's one of the largest universities in Germany, and it's private. And we have also Sino School Business of Technology. And if you're interested in partnering, right? So Lin Liu is the person to talk with. Now, let me come to the topic. As we already see, there's a huge tension in aging societies. This is true for China, this is true for South Korea, it's also true for Japan and Germany. And we have already social security systems, and we saw in the pandemic that these social security systems do not really provide safety. And the basic income net as a safety net, as a residual safety net, as somebody has said before, has become even more important during the pandemic. And we learned that the governments are overwhelmed with such a task to provide safety for the citizens in such a crisis. But this goes beyond, and the digital revolution does also play a role. So this is associated with insecurity, and people want to have safety. And does the safety net provide safety? So meanwhile, we have already an international discussion on a new social contract, and UBI, as you already mentioned, is on the rise. At least there is some press support on that, but it's also true that political parties at least think about issues like that. So I wrote my dissertation in the 80s on basic income in Germany, so I'm quite familiar with all the institutional details in Germany, but I don't want to go through details. I want to be consciously superficial with respect to the institutional details, not to dig too deep and not to get you lost, right? And my habilitation was by accident on negative income tax in the 90s, and I developed a policy proposal in my habilitation thesis, called it targeted negative income tax, which is in fact nothing else than a time-restricted, targeted to the long-term unemployed employee subsidy, which is in the spirit of a negative income tax. And this was then tested between 1999 and 2002 by randomized controlled trials. So we try to measure a causal effect using, at the end of the day, propensity score matching, and after having successfully evaluated these programs in pilot studies in about 16 cities, this was then rolled out nationwide as a part of the Hartz reforms in 2005. And so meanwhile, we are a couple of years later. So let me go back one step back to the 90s, so after reunification. And what we see here in Germany in the 90s, we in Germany were perceived as the sick man of Europe, right? Today we would say the sick women and men in Europe or whatever. So, but at the 90s, it was the sick man of Europe. And this was, well, even in times where, so here on the right side, you have the GDP percentage change, and the blue columns refer to the right vertical axis. You see, even in times where GDP was enormously growing, the unemployment rate here on the left vertical axis in percent has not dramatically gone down, it has even raised again, right? And the next upswing went down, but raised again. So this was a real issue. This was with respect to basic income, even a very tough one, right? So if you look here to this table, I simplified a little bit, right? Not to get you lost in the details, but to simplify a little bit. But you can see here in the mid 90s, right? The numbers of, well, it's not basic income, but it's a hybrid system that is tax financed, right? It's tax financed, but it refers to your last net income. And so you could get, as an unemployed, after a certain time period of unemployment benefit, about 50% of your last net income, right? Forever, after having passed the means test. And this was called unemployment aid, a kind of hybrid basic income scheme, hybrid because it's not called basic income, and it depends on your previous net income you could get. And due to the fact that the unemployment rate went up, we also saw an unemployment aid recipient increase, which was quite dramatic. And I remember quite well that the Federal Ministry of Labor, for the first time, asked a Freiburg professor in 1998 to come up with an expertise on that issue. Why is that the case? Why do these unemployment aid recipient number double within a couple of years? How this is incredibly expensive, and are there some ideas? And at that point of time, we proposed the abolition of the hybrid system, the unemployment aid system, or in other words, to merge it with the real basic income. And this was then done. There was a lot of discussions, of course, on that in the years to come, but it was done then in 2005 and turned out to be a major reform for the German social system. You might think then due to the reform, the numbers have even more than doubled, right? But this is just a statistical artifact. So just ignore that. Well, the main reason for the increasing unemployment rate was unit labor costs, right? And just a simple diagram for that. So in the 90s, right? We are now in the 90s. In the 90s, the unit labor costs in Germany were much, so that's the red line, much above the European average. And due to the high labor costs, I can tell more about that, why this has happened during the discussion. We had this enormous, after unification, unemployment rate increase, especially, by the way, in East Germany, where the industrial sector was partly shut down, and especially for low qualified people. So the low qualified unemployment rate has risen in East Germany up to 40%, as an enormous high level. So the need to do something was really incredibly intense, and then we came up with so-called Hartz reforms, according to a VW manager who had a commission, a Hartz commission. And these reforms had a lot of elements, can't go through all the elements, but they were implemented between 2003 and 2005. And one of the core elements was the abolition of that unemployment aid. I just tried to explain in a couple of words. A last net income dependent but tax financed unemployment aid, a kind of hybrid system. And this was replaced by Hartz IV, strange name, right? Hartz IV, which is nothing else than the basic income. And that's what we are familiar with, basic income, right? It's tax financed, it's means tested, and there's an obligation to work. And the special thing here is a kind of stick and carrot approach. The stick is that you really have to take off low-paid jobs below your qualification. That's the stick approach. And on the other hand, there's a carrot approach. So there are some incentives to pick up work, and such as targeted negative income, so financial incentives to do that, right? So these Hertz reforms were heavily discussed in Germany, but not only in Germany, but sometimes you forget that they have other ingredients, right? So one thing was that more external flexibility for firms was allowed. So mini jobs, don't want to go through that, but mini jobs up to 415 euros were promoted. Deregulation of temporary agency work was promoted. So much more external flexibility for firms to hire people, right? So lower hurdles just to circumvent to a certain extent the employment protections laws, not illegal, but in fact reducing the hiring costs, economically speaking. And also what is sometimes forgotten, that the case manager unemployment ratio has dramatically improved. So before the reform, one case manager had to deal with 800 on average, 800 unemployed. So there's no, you cannot care about these people, right? So just too many. And this has then dramatically reduced after the reform. In addition, the Federal Employment Agency, so the big agency with 100,000, so with 100,000 employees, was modernized in a McKinsey style, so in a consultant style. So all the workflows were evaluated and improved. Key performance and indicators, KPIs, were introduced for the managers in the federal employment agencies. So kind of not privatization, but kind of McKinsey style to get this agency better. And this has turned out to a better performance, right? So the performance really was evaluated, has been getting better over time. And this was also a huge success of the Hartz reform. Maybe for some, it's even the most important success. At the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, we lost our title as Sick Man of Europe. And the Hartz reforms led to lower unemployment, to higher employment, to more mini jobs, to more temporary agency work, and a stable low wage sector. Also, the distributional issue was not a tough one, right? Just to share a couple of numbers here. It was really hard to imagine. I gave a lot of talks, right, in the 90s and also in 2000s. And people said, well, that's really impossible, right? We have now about 40 million people working. We have no idea how this could be getting more, that we can get up to full employment, right? So this is really impossible to go there. And now we have a historical experience that it is possible to get 5 more million people in work. So before the pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, we had 45 million people working in Germany. So an enormous increase in the number of employed people on the one hand, so that's the participation part. But on the other hand, so that's more the political number, right? The unemployment rate has also dramatically gone down and halved within a time period of about 15 years. So really halved. And so we were close to 2 million before the crisis. Now we are still below 3 million this year, right? So an enormous success. And some say, well, maybe the low wage sector has just increased and you push people into the bad jobs and they don't have a chance to leave these bad jobs. Is it really an improvement? So if you look at the low wage sector, at least the average numbers, you can see that in 2005, here we had about 20% of people in the low wage sector. And so now it's even less, and the average hasn't changed a lot. It's about 20%. And studies also tell us that there's still a ladder, right? From you start a job in the low wage sector, right? You start a job there, and then you improve, and then you increase your income on the one hand because you work with a higher wage because your qualification has increased, and on the other hand that you just work more hours, and the combination higher wage per hour plus more hours leads to a higher income, and this has, on average, it has worked. However, like always, right? However, there are many disadvantages. And I just want to highlight a couple of, right? So there are more, but highlight a couple of. One disadvantage of the new system is that after 12 months, on average, once again, there are exceptions, but after 12 months of unemployment, typically your unemployment benefit, right? Your unemployment benefit from the social security system is running out. And then you need a means test to receive a basic income. And this puts you immediately under pressure, even if you worked about 20 or 30 years, and then you get your unemployment benefit for a certain time period, then immediately you, to get basic income, you have to pass a means test with respect to your wealth and also with respect to your income, a tough one. And then this puts immediate pressure to you to take up jobs below your qualification. It depends, of course, there's a lot of heterogeneity in there. It depends on your case manager, how this is really done in practice. However, that's the idea of how it's for to put people into jobs, should take up jobs even below their qualifications. That's certainly one big issue. Another is quite familiar to all of you, right? The complex application procedures that favors the better informed. Non-take-up is estimated about 30%, and that the needy who fear the bureaucracy and stigma, they just do not apply. This is not heavily discussed in public. This one is more politically relevant. Although the second one is also a real issue. During the pandemic, we had also a big discussion on the self-employed, especially on the self-employed who do not have own employees. So they were just on their own. And typically they do not have access to the unemployment insurance, right? So they don't have, on average. There are exceptions once again. And so if they are getting into trouble, and a lot of them got into trouble, so we talk about 2.5 million people who are self-employed without own employees in Germany, then they have to apply, right, for basic income. So they have to pass a means test, and they have the obligation to take up work. So this has turned out to be a real policy issue, and you will see later on that this is a part then of the political party's program now. And kind of standard topic, right, is that the financial incentives are wrong. The financial incentives, or technically speaking, the benefit reduction rates, so the BRR, incentivizes to take up just mini jobs, about 200 euros per month, rather than full-time job. You might ask me, why is that the case? Well, it is like that for decades, and so we have this disincentive. And also there are a lot of studies, microsimulation on the market, that this should be changed. It hasn't changed so far. All right, the question is, what is the current policy, right? So what we observe, and I checked the political parties' programs in preparation of my talk here, and what you see is the conservative parties. The conservative parties say, well, we have a huge success with the Hartz reforms, we should stick with that, and although they are quite unpopular at the moment, we had big successes, right? So we had 5 million people more working, 2 million less unemployed, no distributional issues on average. So everything's fine. Why should we change a running system, right? It just works. And but of course, some minor changes might be useful. So less red tape is certainly something that could help, right? So more transparency, and less bureaucracy. That's always good. That's what you can always say, right? And also you could say, well, we need a little bit of better financial incentives to take up full-time jobs. That has been said now for decades, but in fact nothing has really happened, right? So the benefit reduction rate, and about almost 10 studies with micro simulations with respect to that topic, but it just doesn't change. Still, it's in the program. And better access to education, sanctions. The conservative parties, they are in favor of sanctions. They say, well, these are important things, and they are explicitly against a universal basic income. It's a part of the political program. So obviously, the pressure to have an opinion on a universal basic income is tough enough so that it's a part of the political program. I was surprised to see that, but they're explicitly against the UBI, conservative parties. Okay, what about the others? The Green Party. So the Green Party is explicitly against Hartz IV. So they propose something else, what they call in German Garantiesicherung, or in English, guaranteed existence minimum. In fact, we talk about a higher basic income, right? A higher basic income, a better B. They do not really say something about the benefit reduction rate, so that's just unclear what they think should be done here. And they're against sanctions. What is pretty new, but they prepared it with many studies, right? That there is should be a basic income for children where a couple of different already existing transfers are unified, right? That's the NIT idea, right? That you unify a couple of already existing transfers to make the system more transparent, and that's what they call, especially for children, basic income for children. Furthermore, they want to change the social security system. So the social contribution financed social insurance system, you might be interested in the numbers. So before the Hartz reforms, we had a 6.5% unemployment insurance contribution rate. Meanwhile, we are even below 3% as an effect of the success of the reforms. Furthermore, legal claim to further training is part of the program. What about the Social Democratic Party? So at the moment, the Conservatives and the Social Democratic Party built a grand coalition. I'm sure you're aware of that, but just want to tell that for those who are not familiar with German institutions and political systems. So the grand coalition between the Conservatives and the Social Democratic Party is now ruling for many years the countries, and we will have an election in September, right? So these are the political parties' programs, especially for the election in September this year. The Social Democratic Party proposes citizen money, Bürgergeld in German, rather than Hartz IV. So it's a second party which is against the current system. However, if you have a closer look to that, it's pretty close to that what is existing, right? It's pretty close to the status quo. So they propose a relaxed wealth means test. The income means test should be unchanged. They suggest less red tape and more transparency, quite general. And they suggest a little less pressure on the unemployed and less sanctions without becoming concrete. So what does that mean? But so the overall message is, let's stick with the incumbent system. Let's rephrase it. Let's just reframe it and say, well, that's something for citizens rather than a system that is perceived as tough, a tough stick system with few carrots. That's the Social Democratic Party approach. Let's come to the Free Democratic Party. They also are for reframing, called their proposal liberal citizen money. But this is pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting because they explicitly approach NIT. So they are in favor of an NIT with one transfer, right? And a benefit reduction rate. And I know the studies behind, so let's just do that now here. On the horizontal axis, you have the gross income. And on the vertical axis, you have the net income. And where the status quo looks like that. So that's the status quo simplified, of course, once again. But what the Free Democratic Party proposes is something like that, right? Unchanged basic income. Don't say that we need more, but a dramatically reduced benefit reduction rate. So they don't say about 50%, but that's what the mindset is. Dramatically lower benefit reduction rate. But don't say anything about financing that stuff, right? So we know that from Robert Moffat's article here, the NIT, and so there's a fiscal burden on that, right? So then to go through that and say just we need an NIT approach. So one transfer, putting together several transfer to one transfer. That's one thing. Do not change the level, but change the benefit reduction rate. So that's a clear policy proposal, and a relaxed wealth means test is also a part of that. Of course, also less red tape and more transparency. Last party, the left party. Also, the left party is for the abolition of Hartz IV, and they now, that's not a surprise, of course, are really for a higher basic income level. So we talk about 1,200 euros per month. They're against sanctions, and there are, but that's the difference. They are not in favor of a universal basic income. They are not in favor of a negative income tax, right? So they still stick with the old system, say, well, we need a basic income for the needy on a higher level, but it's not for everyone, right? It's not for everyone, and don't want to have sanctions. So this is something in between. That's the left party. All right. To conclude, the Hartz reforms are perceived, on average, once again, as a huge success. There was a clear contribution to the German job miracle. Also, wage moderation played an enormous role and was important for higher competitiveness. I didn't say anything about that, but it's also part of the story. Today, all political parties except the ruling conservatives prefer modernized basic income schemes, and elements of an UBI or an NIT are part of some current reform proposals. I presented my own partial basic income proposal to what I call basic money. That's a partial basic income plus tax credits on invitation to all members of parliaments of the Conservative Party and the Green Party 2 years ago, right? So just as an input for their programming. And my impression was the younger conservatives, they are more open for radical reforms. And also some experts in the Green parties are open to more radical reforms, but still there's a status quo bias, right? Why should we change a running system? Okay, some references on the German labor market miracle here, from sick man of Europe to economic superstar. I also refer to Robert Moffat's 2003 article, and I mentioned his 1992 JEL article also in my habilitation thesis. So Robert, good to have you here in the auditorium, and a couple of papers from myself. And as a 2021 paper is a work in progress. Thanks a lot for participating and listening. So this was about 30 minutes. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexander Sperman, for the German view on the thing. More deeper into the policy debates. Not only, but well, we have what other countries have too, but we had big challenges in the reform debate around unemployment, and now everything is moving back. So this leads to a number of core questions. Let me see if we have anything in the chat. I don't see. So are there any questions at the moment from the
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, Robert. Yes, maybe Robert. Yes.
This is a little bit about the German, labor market. What we understand from the U.S. is that U.S. and U.K. have been suffering from skill-biased technological change and perhaps imports and international trade, which have really hurt the low-wage labor market. And a lot of the decline in low-wage jobs has politically really put pressure on increased support for very low-wage workers and the unemployed. But I thought that in Germany, Germany has been very successful in kind of counterbalancing that skill-biased technological change. Germany has been much better at allowing workers to move into better jobs, to the firms do retraining, unions and firms have negotiated well. So I would have predicted that there's not as much pressure in Germany to support low-wage workers who might be suffering from technological change and imports. Am I right about that, or is that not correct?
You're absolutely true that the pressure on the low-wage sector is not that tough as we see it in the US, right? Although, if you talk with Federal Employment Services officials, you will hear, well, we have a high unemployment rate for the low qualified. We have to invest in education, in further training to get these people to work. On the other hand, what we can see also with refugees, by the way, that the local labor markets, there are still, until today, a lot of jobs available in the service sector that are not officially listed, so that you have a gap. On the one hand, before the crisis, we had about 1 million vacancies, 1 million vacancies. Meanwhile, we talk about 500,000 vacancies. And on top of that, there are a lot of local labor markets, you find low qualified jobs for the low skilled. However, the problem is that's not a perspective, that's not a career perspective to work all your life, professional life in the low wage sector, because then at the end of your career, you're running into the basic income scheme. And so we need a lot of more investment in further training and education. You're correct that firms do a little bit, right? But as we know, this is a market failure due to positive external effects. So the firms do a little bit, but they are aware if they that they can lose these people they invest in, and due to positive external effects, and then they underinvest in further training. So at the moment, I see at least an overall rethinking of our further training system, and I hope this will end up with more investment in further training and education to get these people who are in work, that's correct, right? But they are in low wage work, that they have a better chance to grow out of that low wage work, rather than just what I mentioned in my talk, rather than just work with a low wage, minimum wage, legal minimum wage, and a lot of hours to have a high net income.
I have a more conceptual question, which of course may also be relevant for the other presentations, but in my view, so to speak, coming from the German experience, the issue in the last decades, one or two, so to be, in Germany has been to make the social assistance system in a way bearable because it became much too expensive. And the answer of the German policymakers at the end, after advice also from research, was to make to bring in more incentives, so to speak. Yes, so the real issue, what one can learn, I think, from the last years from Germany is making it more bearable. Now, the social assistance systems may have other objectives, like, I mean, fighting poverty, for instance. Yes, I mean, well, we see that poverty has not really big change, but the low wage sector has been very stable, so there was no problems there. But the question is, what is with the future? Yes, in the future we have now the challenge of demography, so the pension problem, poverty at the older age level plays a big role. Is the German system ready to take that already? And the other issue is, well, what is with the young people? Yes, families. Do we protect families enough? And how do we do this balance? Do you see with the debate we have, all what I see, what you'll have listed means less incentives, yes, no pressure anymore, and increase the benefits. But will this be helpful to solve the upcoming demographic challenges?
Well, where do the incentives come from? And so with respect to this framework, we have on the one hand, if you lower the basic income, that would increase the incentive. There's no consensus at all over all political parties that you can do that. So here you could only increase the basic income and then disincentivize, right? So that's what you probably mean. But so here with the B, if you remain on the same level, you do not change the incentives. Also, you could reduce the benefit reduction rate to incentivize people to pick up jobs, and then you are in the NIET world with an unchanged basic income. So still, we do not really know what we want to do, right? And the political parties are not really clear about what they want, except I think the Free Democratic Party. They are pretty clear. They say, well, the basic income should be unchanged and the benefit reduction rate should go down. So this is a clear incentive scheme. And if you do both, you increase the basic income and you reduce the benefit reduction rate, then it's of course a question what is the overall incentive. And I agree, the parties are on average not really clear about that. With respect to old age, at the moment, we do not see a large portion of older people in the basic income scheme, but it's clear in the future, the number of older people will increase. And so far, we do not really have an answer to that. And that has to be done in the future. So still, there is a lot of things to do. And with respect to young families, so we don't have a discussion about the earned income tax credit referring to families here in Germany. But we saw that during the pandemic, a family bonus was paid. That's interesting. It was paid to all families, independent of income, right? So rich and poor got the same bonus. So just a bonus of 300 euros. But the trick was, and I think this is something for the future, that those who are rich, they in fact get the bonus, but on the other hand, they have to pay higher taxes ex post, right? So that at the end of the day, they don't have an advantage of this additional bonus. Only the poorer families have a real net effect on their income due to the family bonus. And this has been done for the first time and not very well communicated. So people are not aware of that, but this is how it works. And so obviously families need support, and the family bonus of the pandemic here was one innovative instrument to support in a targeted way families with low income.
Thank you very much so far.
Alexander, can I ask a question? So how does the issue of immigration or the refugees enter into this discussion of social assistance programs?
Yeah, the refugee influx 2015 with about 1 million refugees coming within a short time period has challenged the system, right? It was an enormous policy debate in 2016 and 2017. But what we can see is that if you take a longer perspective, right? So if you take a 5-year perspective, then an enormous portion of the refugees got low-wage jobs, right? Low-wage jobs. Some are also got jobs where they got education, right? In our dual education system, only few could get jobs as physicians, right? So on average, people were young but low qualified, and due to low hurdles. So this time we did it different, right? So you might remember the 80s or not. So we had high hurdles for refugees to work. So really high hurdles. So they were not allowed to work. So it was forbidden to work for them. So they got the basic income, right? So they had no other chance. And now we opened up the labor market for those incoming and say, well, you have the opportunity to work, just get your language skills right? And if you have your only basic language skills, if you have that, then the low wage sectors opens up and you could maybe work in the kitchen of a restaurant, right? To make it very clear. And after some basic language skills, you don't have to be an interpreter, right? Then you can pick up such a work. And this has been done, low wage sector. So to a certain extent, not all of them, of course, a certain extent, they got jobs in the low wage sector, some got jobs in dual education, and only few were in high qualified sector. So overall, we can see that it's not a Miami boat lift issue, right? But at least it's, to our own surprise, not a hot topic anymore, to my subjective opinion at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay, I mean, again, we are very good in time. And since I see no further question and we have to move on anyway, I thank Alexander Sperman very much for his contribution and insights. And now we move up north in Europe to the countries where we think social assistance was invented. Maybe that's just the image, okay, and not also prejudice. Björn Gustafsson is welcomed in the round, one of the Swedish experts, also with lots of knowledge about China, but he speaks about Sweden today. Social assistance in Sweden, provision, recipients, and challenges. And Björn is from the University of Gothenburg.
Okay, so the first thing is, can I share my screen?
Yes, there's a green button below.
Yeah.
If you have your cursor at the bottom, and you have to click there.
Yeah, there, just under close. Let's see. No.
That's not bad. Yes. So now you have to bring in your presentation.
Okay.
Just open up. I see a ship. Okay, wonderful.
Do you see my text? Yeah.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, so I can start. Excellent. Thanks for having me and also for listening. And I think I learned a lot today. I would start similar to Alexander, but go by a ship which sailed from Gothenburg 1645. And it took about less than 2 years to construct it. And it was in charge for a short period until it sank. And then one came to the idea one would make a reconstruction, and that was made a few years ago. And after a building period, now it was 8 years, it started to sail. And it sailed around Africa, and it ended up in what we call Canton or Guangzhou. So by that, I would say we have a very long time relation with Guangzhou. Not everyone might know about it, but I think today I can talk about it.
Great.
Okay, so my talk, hope I will keep the time. 10 different points to talk about. First, some introduction remarks, then definitions, then about how legislation has changed over the years, about central local government responsibilities, the process, about social assistance norms, then the number of recipients during various years, and about who are the recipients, and finally, a few words about the policy debate. Introduction, some remarks. About 2 decades ago, I was involved in a EU-funded research project where we actually investigated social assistance systems in 6 different European countries: France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Sweden, and Portugal. And we published a thick book which came out 2002, edited by Chiara Saraceno, who also translated it into Italian. So if you read Italian, it's available also in that language. I will not go through that book, but just say that what I learned was that the social assistance systems are very deeply embedded in a country's social system, in family policy, what it has to do with labor market policy, etc. So for myself, I learned that social assistance was very different in Italy, Spain, than it was in, say, Germany and Sweden. There's quite a lot of variation within Europe. And after the presentation of Germany, I would also say that we learned in that project that Germany and Sweden were always thought to be very similar when it comes to social assistance systems. So I think it's useful that in the presentation here, I came after the introduction of Germany. The other introduction, I would say that a few years ago, I wrote a paper together with the Chinese sociologist where we compared social assistance system in China and Sweden. And we found quite a lot of differences. And I think the most striking differences was that the Swedish system has a much longer history than the Chinese counterparts. So when one in China talked about the new system of social assistance, which was first rolled out in urban areas and then in rural areas, when we tried to find someone in our country who lived when that happened in our country, it was not possible because the system is much older. I think it can also be useful to say something about definitions and say something of what I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about means-tested transfers that are paid by the Social Insurance Office. That means housing benefits. There is some benefits for refugees. There is also a small program which goes to immigrants who are not qualified for old age pension. Not going to talk about them. And I'm not going to talk about unemployment benefits either. They are paid by unemployment insurance funds and are heavily public subsidized. So nothing about that. Instead, I concentrate on a benefit, on a system which has been in place for a very long time, but has changed name many, many times. It started with the Swedish name fattigvård, or poor relief, which was paid by a large number of rural and urban governments. And you can see the history is fairly long. Then and one can talk a lot about the long history. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to jump into the 50s when it was thought that we were not poor. So poor relief was renamed to social help. But also help is not a very good name in the public debate. So next name was social socialbidrag or social assistance. And much of the law we have today comes from 1982, although there have been some changes in the legislation 2002, making it more complicated, but I'm not going into that very much. I would also say that there are the revision of legislation is on its way, and I will perhaps have time to make some comments on that. But relating to what we have heard here earlier about discussions of negative income tax, I can say we had that kind of discussion in the 80s, and actually we had some experiments. And they were not evaluated scientifically, but the outcome of that was that people lost faith in this kind of programs. There were some local experiments, and it was hoped that the number of people receiving social assistance would go down very much due to that. That didn't happen. And it also turned out to be very costly to have some kind of negative income tax. So it seems as this kind of discussion of negative income tax comes up now and again, but for the moment at least, that's not a topic in the Swedish debate, which I will go into. So, yes. Next thing, yes, the new law might come. So here is a suggestion which handed over to the minister last year. But I don't know how much you follow the Swedish policy debate, but actually earlier this week there was a vote in the Swedish parliament, and now we don't have any government anymore. So it's a big question, are we going to have a new election or will there be a new government? So the minister here, she is since Monday an ex-minister. I will talk more about local central government's responsibilities and say that when we talk about social assistance, it's something which is organized and which is also processed by the local government. And today we have 290 local governments, and they have social welfare boards. And it's those who are responsible for paying out social assistance. And they also they fund the benefits. And I should also say that those decisions can be appealed, and the legal regulations are quite complicated. I had one colleague, a lawyer, who wrote a 600-page long book about the regulations of how to receive social assistance. Anyhow, we also have a central government agency, the National Board of Health and Social Welfare, who oversees the activities of the Social Welfare Board. For example, they produce a handbook. The latest one was published just 1 month ago, and they also publish newsletters. And we also have something which I will talk more about, and that is the norm when the income test which is applied. And that is nowadays the same for all local governments. But in order for you to better understand what we're talking about, I'm going to show the process of getting social assistance. And here we have it. I would say there are at least 4 steps. And the first is that you have to apply. And that is something we have discussed in several presentations, that this leads to that there's probably a large extent of non-use in this kind of systems. And it's difficult to really make a good estimate how high the non-take-up is, but I can refer to papers which have tried to do that, but generally they indicate that the non-take-up is quite severe. So if you are interested in getting this assistance, you first contact your local welfare board, their office. You can do it by telephone or by internet. And then you have an appointment. First you book an appointment, excuse me. And then you meet a social worker and you bring in your documents which indicate your income and your family status and like that. The social worker makes then a review, and a time after that the decision is made. And usually you get social assistance for a period of 1 year, of 1 month. And if you need it for a second month, you have to come back. Now I'm going to try to make this a little bit more concrete. So here we have a social welfare office, actually in Gothenburg, and we also have a social worker who you will meet if you're applying. And if you go to the web, you can also find instructions, and I will see if that works today. A very short film indicating how this works, and we will see.
This film is to give you information if you are thinking about applying for social assistance. There are different ways of supporting yourself financially, and we will try to help you find your way from the start. Social assistance is the last resort for supporting yourself. If you can find a job or start studies, you should definitely do that. If you have the right to other income or assistance from the Social Insurance Agency, the Public Employment Service, an unemployment fund, or student aid, you must use that first. If you are married or living with a partner and the other person has an income, he or she has an obligation to support you. If you have your own assets, such as money saved in a bank, you must use this first. If you have shares, a car, a tenant-owner apartment, house, boat, or other goods, you must sell them to support yourself. It is important that you realize the social services will demand that you have tried all of these ways of supporting yourself before you can apply for social assistance from them. Start by contacting the social services in the area where you live to review your situation. Their phone number and office hours can be found on the website for the city district. If it becomes clear during the phone call that you may be entitled to social assistance, we will ask for your consent to search for information in various registers to start an investigation into your financial situation and how you have planned to support yourself. During the phone call, you will also be told what papers you must take to your first meeting with us. The investigation will continue at the meeting, and we will go through the papers and documents you have with you. We will look at your financial situation and how you can reach the goal of supporting yourself. You will need to make a new application every month if you still need social assistance. We will follow up developments together. It is important that you tell us of any changes in your life situation, your financial situation, or if you or your partner find a job. You can get answers to any questions you may have when you meet an official.
So, to summarize what she said, that you should support yourself by paid work or drawing on savings or sell assets, only if such options are exhausted or do not exist, a person is eligible for social assistance. And it also means that typically an unemployed person has to register at an employment office and active search for job. It's also the case that there were some changes in the law 2002, which refers to people who are aged 18 to 20, or even if you are under 25. And that is something which I learned when I was doing research together with people from south of Europe. I found it very strange that a person who had finished secondary school in Sweden and was not doing studies could be eligible for social assistance. So it has been a big debate on how to look at this. And it has also changed over the years, which I think we will see when we come to statistics on who are receiving the social assistance. However, there are those social assistance norms, which are nowadays central for all of Sweden. That was not the case before 1997. It was a big debate to make them the same all over the country. And one should also remember that housing costs are regarded on a separate way. And the norms means that one considers the number of adults in a household and for children, the age of the child. So something about how high the norms are. For if you are a person living alone without children, it is 4,180 kronor a month plus housing costs. And if you relate that to the average wage of a low earner person, that is about 50%. So after that, I would say something about the number of people who are on social assistance. And I think it's important here when we talk about statistics that the definition I'm going to talk about is people who receive social assistance during at least once during a year. So the number I refer to here express just this. And we have very long time series. We can see from starting from poor relief going over to social assistance. And the all-time high happened in 1933, which we who know something about economic history knows that that was a deep recession. But we also had a second top in 1996 with 8% of the population living in a household which received social assistance. Here you have a time series of the last 30 years. And you see that the 90s was quite different from what's happening after that. And if you have studied Swedish economic history, you know that the 90s was a period with very large economic problems, and unemployment increased quite a lot. And I will not go into what happened with the Swedish macroeconomics, but it's very clear that the development here during the 90s was very much linked to the macroeconomic development. And after that, you see that the proportion of people living on social assistance have gone down. And I think that also explains why we today don't have much of discussion on social assistance and how to make changes. Who are the people who run a high risk of receiving social assistance? First of all, I would stress the difference to what we heard about from Japan. Here we are talking about young adults. The rate of receptions among old people is, as I will show, fairly low. We are also talking about single parents, which I understand from other countries is often a group having relatively high rates of receipt. And we are talking about immigrants. And I will talk more about immigrants soon. Immigrants and young adults have the problem together, or the characteristics together, that they enter the labor market. So discussions on social assistance in Sweden very much has to do with how to enter and keep a job. While on the other side, we know that rates of social assistance receipt among people exiting work life and the old are low. So if you don't trust me, I have a time series showing the rate of social assistance receivers among people aged 20 to 24. And you see that at the end of the 90s, when the Swedish economy was in deep trouble with high unemployment, as many as 1 of 6 young persons received social assistance. And then the proportion has gone down. Here is about people age 40 to 44. It's very similar to when we talk about the entire population. So the proportion is not negligible, but not that very high. And if you don't believe me when I say that it's very few people who are old who receive social assistance, here you can look at the numbers. So, but we have this issue of international migration, and that is fairly large nowadays. Here you see the number of households native who receive social assistance. And you see that the numbers have gone down like the other time series I showed you. And look at year 2020, last year. There are something like 80,000 people. Compare that to what we have here, which is the number of foreign-born. We are up to 200,000 last year. So now I think you believe me when I say that the issue of social assistance very much is an issue of immigration. And that, of course, is related to what happened 2015, but it has a longer started much earlier. So I will also say something about dynamics of social assistance receipt, and say that typically we can find in the registers that many people receive social assistance just once. But the typical pattern is that they come back. They leave, but come back after a period. And then I might come back for a third period. And we also know that people who grew up in a family receiving social assistance run a high risk of receiving social assistance as adults. And I will now go into recent research I did together with co-authors, where we looked into the question, is it the case that social assistance receipt is also affected by the neighborhood where you live? Is it the case that it's easier to apply or easier to receive social assistance if you live in a neighborhood where many receive? And I would say that in some neighborhoods, there are very few people receiving social assistance, but we have this problem of residential segregation, which has increased quite a lot during the last 20 years, meaning that, for example, in the city where I'm living, there are some districts where quite a large number of people receive social assistance. Will that affect how their children are doing? So I'm referring to a study where we followed young adults who were born 1985, grew up in metropolitan Sweden, And we looked at to what extent they received social assistance when they were age 18 to 21. And our research question was, which factors lead to high risk, respectively low risk of receipt? And the kind of factors we were looking at were household and parental factors, immigrant background, social assistance received in parental household, and social assistance received in the neighborhood. I will not go in deep into that, just say that we have the advantage in some of the Scandinavian countries to work with register data. So it's possible to we are not in the situation that we have to work with samples. We can work with the total population. And I have a summary here of the paper. Okay, perhaps not, you'd like to hear it in Chinese. So here is descriptive statistics. The proportion of people who received social assistance when they were 19, 20, or 21 years, if they belong to the majority population or to the population we call visible minorities. By that we mean people who come from low income countries and middle income countries who are visibly different. We have imported a concept which is used in Canada and not very often used in Europe. And what we learn here is that the risk of receiving social assistance is much higher if you have a background from another country. But we also see that there are not so many people who received assistance each year when they were 19, 20, 21. So in many cases, people just leave after once. But in our models, we looked into those people who received assistance when they were 19, 20, or 21. So it's not just once. And I will take this very shortly, but saying that we found that there are a lot of things which affected your risk of receiving social assistance, of course. It had to do with the education and income in the parental home. Also, in case the parents received social assistance, that led to an odds ratio of almost 6, so 6 times as large risk. Everything else kept constant. And we also found that education plays a role. So if you have a longer education, the risk of receiving social assistance is fairly low. But in addition to that, we found that the risk of receiving social assistance is related to how many in your neighborhood that receive social assistance. And that I'm going to illustrate by a case. Here you see that the proportion receiving social assistance in the neighborhood goes from 0 up to 40%, which is what we could observe in our data. And then we have some cases, people with some high risk of receiving social assistance. And we see that the risk increases actually with the rate of social assistance recipients in the neighborhood. So what are the present challenges for social assistance? Among those who receive social assistance, larger and larger proportion are immigrants. So that means the key question here is actually integration into the labor market of immigrants. We, like Germany, experienced a migration crisis in 2015. And in the present debate, there's a lot of discussion about residential segregation and also of criminality taking place in neighborhoods where typically many immigrants live. So it's a very hot topic, how to look at immigration issues, which rules should govern future migration to Sweden, and also how to integrate people who have already arrived. And it has also led to, here you have the migration crisis, which we talked about. That's the number of asylum searches selected years, and it was really 2015 which marked a big difference. But we can also see that the political landscape has changed. And nowadays we have a party which is sees as a main issue to not only reduce the number of immigrants, but also, yes, to reduce it, not only those who come to the country, but also make people leave. And they are nowadays the third largest party in parliament. And we don't know what influence they will have on the new government, which has to be formed starting next week. So that's one issue. And yes, there is already now a new legislation when it comes to migration. So the kind of law which was existing before 2015 don't exist anymore. So there will be temporary residence permit as a rule. And there are also suggestions for making it more difficult to be a Swedish citizen, to have language tests, and also tests when it comes to knowledge about the Swedish society. And there are also in the policy debate suggestions for condition the right to some of the benefits on citizenship. So the picture is quite different from how it was 10 years ago. And I will finally finish by saying something about what's happening during the COVID. And as you know, the COVID is the big issue nowadays. And actually, while GDP is projected to increase this year in Sweden, that is not the situation on the labor market is still getting worse. So here you see the number of the unemployment rate, how it has changed since COVID started. So based on that, one would expect that we would see many more people receiving social assistance. However, we don't see much of that. What we see here is the number of people receiving social assistance by month. And the upper figure relates to foreign-born, and the lower relates to native-born. So the foreign-born are again in majority. And you can see among native-born, there is a tendency that there will be more people receiving social assistance since the COVID happened. But I would say personally that I think the increase was not so large as one would have expected. So I round off saying that today we are celebrating a midsummer evening in Sweden. And you can also see I have a Chinese teacup while doing the celebrations. So.
Yeah, thank you very much, Björn, for spending. I didn't realize that. I always forget that Sweden celebrates midsummer these days, and you spend it with us, so to speak. We have to be very. I mean, people around the world have to know that this is the most important time of the year And well, to have you here today is a big honor, so to speak. Well, okay. Now I have a few questions, but perhaps first others, if they would like to. At the moment, I have to see whether I can view somebody raising hands. I don't see this at the moment. Well, I found your talk very interesting because you all talk about the same kind of issues in principle, but I see through all the talks a different perspectives. Yes, for instance, earlier we have spoken about the older people, what they bring as a burden to the system, at least in the future. But when I listen to you, Björn, I mean, your numbers were quite interesting. That social assistance is mostly relevant for the young, and not necessarily the low-skilled or the old people, and of course the migrants, which is a separate topic. Maybe we can elaborate a little bit. Have you just misinterpreted the numbers in the other countries we have seen before, or is this something special you see, Björn, for Sweden? And a second question, a little bit related to that. So far I understand, Sweden still has no minimum wage, yes, and the minimum wage is also something which is a social assistance in a way, in a different way. Why do you refuse? Why is Sweden one of the last country after Germany leaving, not leaving or staying outside of the camp of the minimum wage people, and why is this so? And maybe this leads to a more general the issue or debate how we deal with the whole social assistance issue.
Should I answer? Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yes. When it comes to minimum wage, I'm not an economic historian, but I think going back to the 30s or something like that, that has not been an issue actually. And that has to do with the way which wages are negotiated between representatives for trade unions and employers. So they came to an agreement in 1938 that we would not let the state take those kind of decisions. And that has been honored ever since then. And it's more like, almost like in a religion, that that is something which you should not try to affect the Swedish model. When one talks about the Swedish model, it's very much about this. So at present, there is no suggestion for letting the parliament decide on that. That is just one comment. Another comment is that perhaps if we have talking about pensions, we could talk about, to some extent, the Swedish pension system has been very successful. And I know that in the 80s, Barr wrote an article in Journal of Economic Literature saying that there is almost no old age poverty in Sweden. And that is to some extent true, because there are very few old people born in Sweden who, and over 65, who are poor. But when it comes to foreign-born people over 65, the poverty rates are going up. So that is one kind of reflection on what you said. I think also when we talk about social assistance, it's a case that once the number of recipients increases, that puts efforts on politicians to do something and to introduce programs for those who are most needed. When it comes to old people, that was a very big issue when it comes to developing pensions during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And one could see that the old people actually disappeared among recipients. But instead, we have got this problem of entering the labor force. And there is really no program for them. And it's very difficult to think of some kind of program because the solution of their way of supporting themselves is to work, and so that's the key question, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We have two more questions at the moment. Alexander first, and then Robert. Alexander.
Yeah, Björn, very interesting talk, and I'm really surprised that it obviously you failed in Sweden to integrate immigrants. So 200,000 versus 20,000, so tenfold more immigrants than natives and PA roles. So I wonder whether this is a policy failure, or didn't you invest in language skills? Is the labor market not open for migrants? Is it a housing issue that you push people into segregation, or what are the reasons for that? So I'm a little bit confused. So you are typically the country where we look at, so the Nordish Swedish model and so on. What's going on?
Yeah, I'd like to answer on that. And I think there are a lot of reasons. You can look at it on one side from the kind of characteristics immigrants bring in. We know that during the 60s and the 70s, a lot of migrants came from Finland and other European countries, and they found jobs very easily. But that's not the case nowadays. And they don't have the skills in Swedish language, for example. That's one reason. Another reason is to look at the employers. And we talked about even if we don't have a minimum wage, the lowest wage is relatively high. So it's not attractive if you don't have much of Swedish skills to be hired. There are not those kind of jobs to get. And I think that are two big factors. We also know from a lot of studies that immigrants are discriminated in the labor market. So if you hand in your application saying your name is Alexander Spearman, that might not be a big issue. But if your name is Mohammed or something like that, you are not as likely to get interviewed. And there are a lot of papers which have actually done that, mainly focusing if you have an Arabic sounding name. So that was just three reasons. But I would say that this issue is very big. And when you ask the Swedish electorate about what are the biggest issues, it comes up as one of the three largest: healthcare, and also, I don't remember what the second, but immigration and integration of immigrants is really a big issue. And you can see it in papers which compare the situation in Sweden with many other European countries, that I think the only one of the few countries where the situation is comparable is actually Germany, which I understand have some of the similar problems as in Sweden. But I know that the support for Alternativ für Deutschland is not as large as for their Swedish counterparts.
Okay.
Thanks, Björn. Now, Robert, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Björn. Just a general question, which is that the social assistance program you described seems to be very low benefit, very, very modest. At 385 euros per month sounds pretty low to me. So it sounds to me as though the social assistance program there is really covering the very, very, very poor families in Sweden. That's one question. I hope I'm right about that's all it's covering. But the reason I asked that is because in all the other talks we've heard today, there are pressures in most of these countries to extend benefits higher up into the income distribution, either through earned income tax credit or child tax credits or even UBI. You didn't say anything about Sweden, so I'm assuming those pressures and political forces are not at work in Sweden. And I guess my last question is that because of the Swedish model, which already provides a lot of benefits to working families, to families in general, to children, a lot of social benefits are already provided higher up in the income distribution. Perhaps that's the reason why you don't see the same pressures for extending those social assistance benefits higher up. So kind of a general question.
Yeah, good question, but not that so easy to answer. One answer would be that there are a lot of social services which comes from the local government, for example, childcare. So if you're a mother or a father, the probability that you can have childcare which is of relatively high quality and relatively low paid is high. And then you should be able to work if you don't have any physical problems. So that is one reason why one is not thinking so much of extending benefits, more to provide social services, I would say. Also compared to the discussion we had on Japan, and that it's that cost for healthcare, or private cost for healthcare, are fairly low. So there's not that need to apply for social assistance to cover your healthcare. Of course, if you can't work, that's the case. But that's the situation, I would say. When it comes to the tax scale, there have been quite a lot of changes, and to talk about them requires quite a lot of time and preparations. But we have had non-social democratic governments who were in place for 8 years, and they introduced tax changes in the tax systems, which with an emphasis of getting more people into work. Unfortunately, that was not constructed in a way that one could do evaluation if those measures were effective or not. But as long as we had the previous government before the Social Democrats came back, there were a lot of tries to change the tax scale with the intention of getting more people to work. So from academic standpoint, we don't know if that was effective, or if it was effective, how effective it was. But that was mainly directed to people higher up in the income scale than those who received social assistance. So I think when policymakers talk about how to reduce the number of social assistance recipients and costs, they mainly think of making some other kind of reform, so people are not applying.
Okay, I think Robert looks satisfied, Alexander too. So he has still his hands on, but I think it's off. I'm afraid we have already passed the time limit, so I think there is no need to ask for further questions. It was a lovely day, afternoon, and from the German perspective, heavy late night in China, and well, very early in the United States. So
and after
it's
midnight in Japan, actually.
After midnight, thank you very much for being with us for so long time. I enjoyed the day a lot. I of course, we haven't solved the question, what are we really after with this all? Yes, I mean, the objective still is to fight poverty, I guess, and to increase equality, and to preserve a good state in the long term against the challenges we have. So we learned a lot. At least I learned a lot even about my own country. So that was great. But it also shows that we have possibilities to improve the world. And in other sessions, now a chance to go deeper is tomorrow. So if you have time, please come back and join us. I also see Enrica Coda in regards to Italy, who has to work hard tomorrow. So thank you very much for today. And I mean, Shai-sang, if you have nothing to say, I would say we have to close down. You don't have. Then thank you very much for joining us today. It was a very wonderful session. See you all some other time or tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.